I still remember that evening like a scar burned into my heart. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days straight, and the wind outside rattled the loose shutters of my little apartment as if it wanted to get inside. I sat by the window with my old shawl wrapped around me, watching the world go dark. My hands, wrinkled and trembling, held the letter my son had sent me, a letter that would change everything. "Mom, we just don't have the space right now," it read. "You'll be better off where you are." That single sentence felt like a knife twisting deep inside my chest. I had raised him with every ounce of love I had, and now, when I needed him most, he was refusing to take me in. My name is Eleanor Grant, and this is the story of how my son's rejection broke me, and how his own daughter uncovered the truth he tried so hard to hide. My son, Thomas, had always been the practical one, the ambitious one. His wife, Marilyn, matched him perfectly, sharp, successful, and always worrying about what the neighbors thought. They had one daughter, Sophie, my beautiful granddaughter. She was my little shadow once, the child who would braid my hair and ask me to tell stories about the old days. But children grow, and distance grows faster. It wasn't always like this. Thomas and I were close once. When his father passed away early, I worked 2 jobs just to send him to college. I remember the nights I'd sit alone in our small kitchen, sewing clothes under the flickering bulb while he studied upstairs. Every stitch I made felt like a promise that one day his life would be better than mine. And for a while it was. He became an engineer, bought a beautiful house in a quiet suburb, and started a family. I thought he'd never forget where he came from. But people change when comfort replaces struggle. The letter slipped from my hands and landed on the floor. I stared at it for a long time. There were no tears left in me that night. Only silence and the sound of rain hitting the window pane. My friend Nora Bennett, who lived across the hall, knocked softly on my door. "Eleanor," she whispered, stepping in. "Did you talk to Thomas?" I just shook my head. Nora didn't need an answer. She saw everything written on my face. "You can stay with me," she said kindly. "At least until things settle." But I couldn't. I didn't want to be a burden to anyone. "No, Nora," I said. "He's my son. I'll find a way to make him see reason." Weeks passed. My savings were thinning fast. The heater stopped working, and winter was approaching. I tried calling Thomas once more, but every time I did, Marilyn picked up. Her voice was polite, but distant, like someone speaking to a stranger. "Eleanor, we're just overwhelmed right now," she said. "Maybe after the holidays." After the holidays. The same words every time. I stopped calling. Then one morning, a letter came, not from Thomas, but from Sophie. Her handwriting was bubbly, the way it had been since she was little. "Grandma," she wrote, "Dad said you're busy, but I miss you. Can I visit this weekend?" My heart leapt. Maybe she didn't know what was happening. Maybe I still had someone who cared. When Sophie arrived that Saturday, the gray in my world lifted. She looked just like her mother, but with my late husband's eyes, kind and curious. "Grandma," she shouted, throwing her arms around me. "You've gotten so thin. Are you eating?" I laughed softly, brushing her hair back. "Of course I am, sweetheart. Don't you worry about me." But she looked around my small apartment and frowned. "This place is so cold." I told her I liked it that way. It made me feel alive. But the truth was, I could no longer afford to keep the heat running all day. We spent hours talking. She told me about college, about her boyfriend, about how stressed her parents had been lately. I listened, smiling, though every mention of Thomas felt like a small wound reopening. "Dad says you're doing fine here," she said suddenly. "He said you like living alone." My heart clenched. "He did?" I asked quietly. "Yes," she replied. "He said you prefer your independence." I smiled faintly. "He's right, dear. I've always been independent." I lied because I couldn't bear to make her choose between love and loyalty. Before she left that evening, she hugged me tighter than usual. "I'll come again soon, Grandma. Maybe next weekend," she said. And she did. Every week after that. Sometimes she brought soup, sometimes flowers. Once she even brought an old sweater of her father's for me to wear. "He'll never notice," she whispered with a grin. Slowly, the emptiness in my apartment began to fade. Sophie filled it with laughter again. But something in her eyes changed one afternoon. She had come by unexpectedly and found me sitting near the window, rubbing my knees to keep them warm. "Grandma," she said hesitantly, "Dad told me you're staying in a retirement community. He said you have everything you need there." My hands froze mid-motion. "He said what?" I whispered. She looked puzzled. "Yeah. He said you chose to stay there instead of moving in with us because you liked the peace." The lie stung deeper than I expected. I had never imagined my own son would lie to his child about me. That night, after she left, I sat in the dark for a long time. The truth of it settled heavy on my chest. Thomas wasn't just avoiding responsibility, he was erasing me. He didn't want his daughter to see the truth, to see how her grandmother was living in a crumbling apartment, shivering through the nights. He wanted her to believe I was content somewhere else, out of sight, out of mind. The next week, Sophie came again, this time with a box of groceries. "Grandma," she said, "I know you said you're fine, but I can see you're not. Please let me help." Her voice cracked. "Why didn't Dad tell me you were struggling?" I smiled gently. "Because he loves you, dear. And maybe he didn't want you to worry." She shook her head. "No, Grandma. He didn't want me to know." Her words echoed long after she left. I lay awake that night, listening to the wind whisper through the cracks in the walls. The more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't just neglect. It was shame. Thomas didn't want his successful life tainted by the image of an aging mother living in poverty. But Sophie, she was different. She had my heart, my courage, and perhaps one day, she'd have my truth. The next morning, I made tea and looked through an old box of photographs. Pictures of Thomas as a boy, of his first day at school, his graduation, his wedding. I held each one like a prayer until my tears blurred the edges. "Maybe," I whispered to my late husband's photo, "she's the one who'll see what her father's forgotten." Just then, a knock echoed on the door. When I opened it, Sophie stood there, eyes red, holding her phone tightly. "Grandma," she said, trembling, "is it true you've been living here alone all this time?" Her question hung heavy in the cold air as I stood frozen, my heart pounding. It was the moment I had feared, and the moment everything was about to change. If you've ever felt forgotten by your own, stay with me, dear heart. This story might just be yours too. Sophie's question sliced through the quiet like a blade. "Is it true you've been living here alone all this time?" I couldn't meet her eyes. My lips trembled as I forced a faint smile. "Oh, sweetheart, who told you that?" She looked down, her fingers tightening around her phone. "Dad." I confronted him after I left last time. "He said you were in a comfortable senior apartment. But then I searched online, and there's no place by that name anywhere near here." The air in the room felt heavy. I reached for her hand. "Sophie," I whispered, "your father, he didn't mean harm. He just—" She pulled away, tears glistening in her eyes. "Didn't mean harm? Grandma, you're freezing in this apartment, living alone, and he's pretending you're fine? Why would he lie to me?" I didn't answer. What could I say? That the son I once cradled, fed, and prayed for now hid me like a secret? Sophie paced across the room, angry, hurt, confused. "Mom must know too," she muttered. "She's always so careful about appearances." I stayed silent. Sometimes silence says more than words ever could. She stopped suddenly, staring at me. "You didn't even tell me, Grandma." "Why?" I sighed. "Because I didn't want to come between you and your parents. I didn't want you to see your father the way I see him now." Her shoulders dropped, her anger melting into sorrow. "You've always protected everyone, haven't you?" I smiled sadly. "That's what mothers do." Sophie sat beside me, tears falling freely now. "You deserve better. You deserve a home, warmth, love." Her voice broke. "I can't believe Dad did this." She wiped her cheeks and stood up with sudden determination. "I'm taking you with me." My heart skipped. "What?" I'm taking you to my place. You can stay with me. I shook my head.
Sophie, no.
You're young. You have your own life to build. I don't want to burden you. She knelt beside me. Grandma, you're not a burden. You're family. Her words warmed something in me I thought had long died. Still, fear lingered. Your father won't like that, I whispered. She straightened, her jaw firm. Then he can deal with it. I'm done pretending. That night, Sophie carried a few of my belongings into her car. My heart was heavy leaving that small apartment, the place that held my memories and my loneliness. As we drove through the city, rain tapping on the windows, I thought about Thomas. Would he be angry? Ashamed? Or would he even care? Sophie's apartment was small but full of life. Books stacked on every shelf, half-finished paintings leaning against the wall, and the smell of cinnamon candles filling the air. You'll sleep in my room, she said. I'll take the couch. I protested, but she insisted. For the first time in months, I slept in warmth. The next morning, I woke to the sound of her humming in the kitchen. It reminded me of how Thomas used to hum when he was a boy, before the world hardened him. Good morning, Grandma, Sophie said with a smile. Breakfast is ready. Eggs, toast, and your favorite tea. I chuckled softly. You remember everything. Days turned into weeks. We fell into a quiet rhythm. She'd go to work, and I'd tidy her small apartment, cook dinner, and wait by the window like an old habit. I didn't tell her how much I loved it. The sound of footsteps coming home, laughter filling the rooms again. But peace doesn't last when built on lies. One evening, Sophie came home pale and trembling. She held her phone out toward me. Dad called, she said flatly. He knows you're here. My stomach turned. What did he say? Her voice shook. He said I'm being manipulated. That you're playing the victim to get attention. My heart shattered. He said that. She nodded, tears spilling down. He said you made him look heartless in front of everyone. That you chose to live alone. I sank into the couch, clutching my chest. I chose nothing, I whispered. I begged him to take me in. Sophie's face hardened. Then why would he lie? Because lies are easier to carry than guilt. Because admitting the truth would mean facing the man he's become. The next day, I asked Sophie not to fight him. Promise me you'll stay calm, I said. She hesitated, then nodded. Okay, Grandma. But I can't let him treat you like this. A few days later, Thomas showed up unannounced. I was folding laundry when the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, his tall figure filled the frame, polished shoes, pressed shirt, eyes cold. Mom, he said curtly, we need to talk. My throat tightened.
Thomas, come in.
He stepped inside, glancing around Sophie's apartment, as if it were beneath him. You've made quite the mess, haven't you? What do you mean? I asked softly. He crossed his arms. Sophie's been calling me nonstop. She's emotional, irrational. You filled her head with nonsense about being abandoned. I told her nothing but the truth, I said quietly. His jaw clenched. The truth? The truth, Mom, is that you didn't want to move in with us. You said you liked your independence. My voice trembled. I said that because Marilyn told me you were too busy, that I'd be in the way.
He scoffed.
You always twist things. You've done this since I was a kid, guilt-tripping people with your fragility. I flinched. Those words weren't his, they were Marilyn's. I could hear her sharp tone echoing in his mouth. Before I could respond, Sophie appeared from the hallway. Dad. Thomas turned, startled. You're home early. I heard everything, she said, her voice shaking. And you're wrong. Sophie, you don't understand. No, Dad. She cut him off. I understand perfectly. You lied to me. You told me Grandma was living happily in some fancy senior home while she was freezing alone in a broken apartment. Why? He stammered. It's complicated. Try me, she demanded. The silence stretched painfully. Finally, he muttered, because it was easier. Because your mother didn't want her around. Sophie's face turned pale. Mom didn't want her around? Thomas sighed. She said having your grandmother live with us would change everything. She wanted space, peace. She said she couldn't handle the noise or the reminders of age. I stood frozen, the room spinning around me. Sophie's voice cracked. So you threw your own mother away for her comfort? Thomas looked at me, then really looked. For a moment, guilt flickered in his eyes, but pride drowned it. You wouldn't understand, he said coldly. You'll see one day, when you have your own family. Sophie took a step forward.
No, Dad.
I hope I never see the world the way you do. He exhaled sharply and turned toward the door. You can keep her here if you want, but don't expect help from us. The door slammed. The sound echoed through the small apartment like thunder. Sophie ran to me, wrapping her arms around my shoulders. I'm so sorry, Grandma. I held her tight, tears falling silently. Don't apologize for his choices, dear. Some people forget who taught them love. For days after that, Sophie barely spoke to her parents. I tried to heal her anger, to remind her that bitterness grows like poison. But one night, she showed me something that made my blood run cold. She had been sorting through some boxes in her parents' attic, trying to clear her head, when she found an envelope marked with my name. Inside were letters, dozens of them. Letters I had written to Thomas over the years. Letters he never answered. Letters about my struggles, my loneliness, my need for help. Every single one unopened. Sophie's hands trembled as she placed them on the table. He kept them, Grandma.
He saw them.
He just never cared. I stared at the faded envelopes, my handwriting trembling across the years. My throat closed. He read none of them. She shook her head. Not one. The truth settled like ice in my veins. My son hadn't just abandoned me. He had silenced me, hidden my words, my cries for love, from even himself. And as I looked into Sophie's tearful eyes, I realized something far deeper was broken in my family than I had ever dared to admit. The letters lay spread across Sophie's kitchen table like ghosts of my past. Yellowed paper, torn edges, smudged ink from tears I never admitted to shedding. Sophie sat opposite me, her face pale and trembling. Grandma, she whispered, how could he ignore all of this? I couldn't answer. My voice had left me somewhere between the first and last unopened envelope. Every letter was a piece of me. Pleas for love, for warmth, for a visit that never came. I remember writing this one. I murmured, picking up a letter from 2019. It was winter. The pipes had burst in my building, and the cold was so deep my fingers ached. I told him I couldn't afford the repair. I waited for his call for weeks. Sophie's jaw tightened. And he never came. I nodded.
No.
He sent a check. No message. Just money. She slammed her hand on the table. That's not love, Grandma. That's guilt wrapped in paper. Her anger was pure, but mine was exhausted. He thinks love is measured in bills, not moments, I said softly. It's how the world taught him to feel. Sophie gathered the letters and pressed them to her chest. We can't let him get away with this. What do you mean? I'm going to show him these, she said firmly. Every single one. I froze.
No, Sophie.
Don't. Why not? He deserves to face what he did. Because it won't change him, I said quietly. It'll only harden him more. And you'll lose the father you still have. Her eyes filled with tears. Maybe I already have. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the city lights blur through my tears. I thought about Thomas as a boy, how he'd press his little hand in mine and promise, I'll always take care of you, Mama. Children make promises the world teaches them to break. The next morning, Sophie went to work early. I stayed home, folding laundry, cooking soup, trying to quiet the ache inside me. But around noon, my phone rang. When I answered, a familiar voice spoke, Marilyn. Eleanor, she said crisply. We need to talk. My chest tightened. Marilyn. I know you've been staying with Sophie, she said, her tone cold but trembling underneath. And I know she's been digging through our attic. She found the letters, I said simply. A pause. Then a sharp intake of breath. You weren't supposed to find those. Then why did you keep them? Her voice cracked for the first time. Because I couldn't throw them away. Every time one arrived, Thomas would get angry. He'd say you were manipulating him, that you only wrote to make him feel guilty. But I couldn't destroy them. I gripped the phone tighter. So, you watched me suffer? You let him believe I was nothing but a burden.
She didn't respond.
Just silence. Then, softly, she whispered, "You don't know everything." "What do you mean?" Her tone changed, quieter, almost haunted. "Thomas lost his job 3 years ago. We never told anyone. He didn't want you to see him weak. The money he sent you wasn't from him, it was from me." My heart skipped. "You?" "Yes," she said. "He was drinking, angry, ashamed. He blamed you for everything, said he could never be good enough in your eyes. I didn't know what to do, so I kept your letters to protect him." Tears blurred my vision. "You protected him from his own mother." "I protected him from breaking completely," she said, voice cracking. "He's not the man you remember, Eleanor. He's drowning, and he won't let. He's drowning, and he won't let anyone save him." Before I could answer, she hung up. I sat there in silence, the phone still pressed to my ear, my heartbeat echoing in the empty room. I thought of Thomas not as the cold man who abandoned me, but as the little boy lost inside a grown man's pride. When Sophie came home that evening, I told her everything. She listened, jaw tight, tears brimming. "So Mom lied too," she said bitterly. "She let this go on while you suffered. She thought she was saving him," I whispered. Sophie shook her head.
No.
She was saving his image, not his soul. She stood up suddenly, grabbing her coat. "Where are you going?" I asked. "To see him." I tried to stop her, but she was already out the door. The hours crawled by. I prayed she wouldn't say something she'd regret. I was still sitting in the dark when the door opened. Sophie entered quietly, her eyes red and swollen. "What happened?" I asked, voice trembling. She sat down beside me, her hands shaking. "He broke down, Grandma. I've never seen him like that." My heart stopped. "What did he say?" She wiped her tears. "He said he hated himself. That every letter you sent reminded him of how much he failed. He said he couldn't face you because every word felt like judgment." I swallowed hard. "I never judged him." "I know, but he thought you did." We sat there in silence for a long time. Finally, Sophie whispered, "He wants to see you." My breath caught. "What?" "He said he'll come tomorrow. He wants to talk face to face." That night, I barely slept. Memories and fears twisted in my chest. What would I say? What would he say? Could a lifetime of distance be bridged in one conversation? The next day, the knock came right on time. Thomas stood at the door, his face pale, his eyes hollow. He looked older than I remembered, tired, defeated. "Mom," he said softly. "Thomas," I replied. He stepped inside slowly, as if unsure whether he was welcome. Sophie hovered near the doorway, watching. For a moment, none of us spoke. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out one of my letters. It was creased, stained with something, maybe coffee, maybe tears. "I read them," he said. "All of them." I said nothing. He took a shaky breath. "I thought I could forget. That if I didn't open them, I wouldn't have to face how much I disappointed you. But I read every word last night." My lips quivered. "And what did you feel?" He looked down.
Shame.
Regret. And something I haven't felt in years, a love. I felt my knees weaken. "Oh, Thomas." He stepped closer. "I'm sorry, Mom. For everything. For leaving you alone. For choosing my pride over your pain." I reached up, touching his cheek. "You don't owe me apologies. You owe yourself forgiveness." He broke, then fell to his knees, sobbing like the boy I once knew. I cradled his head, tears falling into his hair. Sophie watched, silently crying. For a moment, I thought it was healing. I thought we'd finally found our way back to each other. But life has a way of testing fragile hope. A week later, I woke up to find Sophie gone. On the kitchen counter lay a note. My hands shook as I unfolded it.
Grandma, don't worry about me.
I need to clear my head. Dad, and I fought again last night. He said things I can't unhear. I'll be at the lake house for a few days. Please don't come after me. I just need space. My heart pounded. I called her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I called again.
And again.
Nothing. Hours passed. The sun set. Still nothing. By evening, panic clawed at me. I called Thomas. Have you heard from her? He sighed, voice heavy. She left after we argued. I thought she'd gone to a friend's. What did you say to her? I demanded. He hesitated. I told her to stop meddling, that she was making things worse between us.
I didn't mean it, Mom.
I was just angry. Angry. The word that ruins families. By midnight, there was still no sign of Sophie. My mind raced with worst-case scenarios. Then, as I stared out the window, my phone buzzed. A call from an unknown number. Hello. I whispered. Mrs. Carter? A man's voice said. This is Officer Reynolds from the County Sheriff's Department. We found a car by the lake, registered to your granddaughter, Sophie Carter. The room spun.
What?
Is she? She's not here, the officer interrupted gently. The car door was open.
Her phone was inside.
We're searching the area now. The phone slipped from my hand. My knees gave out. Thomas's voice echoed faintly as he shouted my name, but I barely heard it. Sophie was gone. And in that moment, I realized the past we had buried was dragging us all down again, one by one. The nights Sophie disappeared felt endless. I sat by the window with my shawl wrapped tightly around my shoulders, staring into the dark as rain hit the glass. The police had searched for hours by the lake, their flashlights slicing through fog, but when dawn broke, there was still no trace of her. Thomas sat slumped on the couch, his head in his hands. He hadn't said a word all night. When the first rays of light crept through the curtains, an officer knocked on the door. Mrs. Carter, Mr. Carter, he said, removing his hat. We found footprints near the lake trail. They lead into the woods, but the rains washed most of them away. We're expanding the search. Please, I whispered, gripping his sleeve. Find her. She's all I have left. He nodded and left quietly. For hours, Thomas and I sat in silence. The house felt hollow, every tick of the clock echoing guilt. Finally, I turned to him. What happened that night, Thomas? Tell me exactly what you said. He hesitated, eyes red. She came into my office, said I had to make things right with you, that I couldn't keep pretending nothing happened. I told her she didn't understand, that she was turning against her own father. And then, he swallowed hard. She said she pitied me, that I was becoming the same kind of man I always hated, cold, defensive, prideful.
Hjälte här.
Told her she'd ruined everything. I told her to get out. I closed my eyes. You didn't mean it. He shook his head.
No.
But I said it. And now she's gone. The air between us was thick with regret. I wanted to comfort him, to tell him it wasn't his fault. But how could I, when I knew every wound in our family started with silence and pride? 2 days later, the police found her alive. It was early morning when the call came. Mrs. Carter, we've located your granddaughter, Officer Reynolds said. She's at a small roadside diner 10 miles from the lake. She's shaken, but unharmed. I felt my legs give out in relief. Thank God, I whispered. Thomas and I drove there immediately. When we arrived, I saw Sophie through the window, sitting in a booth with a blanket around her shoulders, a cup of coffee untouched before her. Her eyes were distant, haunted. Sophie, I said as I rushed in, tears already falling. She looked up, then stood and threw her arms around me. Grandma, she whispered.
I'm sorry.
I couldn't stay there anymore. I needed to think. Thomas approached slowly. Sophie, he said softly, I'm so sorry. She pulled back, her expression torn between anger and sadness. I wanted to believe you changed, Dad. But when you yelled, I saw the same man I grew up afraid of.
He winced.
I know. And I hate that. I've lived with that shame every day. The three of us sat together in that diner, surrounded by the smell of coffee and old vinyl seats. Outside, the rain had stopped. Why did you stay away from Grandma for so long? Sophie asked suddenly, her voice breaking. Why did you let her suffer like that? Thomas rubbed his face. Because I thought I was protecting her from disappointment. Sophie frowned. What does that even mean?
He looked at me then.
Mom, do you remember the night Dad left? My breath caught. Of course. I was 12, he said. You told him to go, said you couldn't live with the drinking and the lies anymore. But I didn't see that side of him. I just saw my mother pushing my father away. And when he left, I blamed you. I felt my heart twist. You were a child, Thomas. You couldn't have known. I know, he said softly. But that blame grew with me. Every argument we had, every time you tried to help me, it all felt like control. Like you were trying to make me into him. Tears streamed down my face. All I ever wanted was to save you from becoming him. He nodded, his own tears falling. And I ran so far the other way that I ended up doing the same thing, abandoning the people who loved me. Sophie reached for his hand.
Dad.
He squeezed it gently. I've made terrible mistakes, sweetheart. But I want to make it right. It was a fragile peace, but peace nonetheless. We drove home together, the silence between us no longer heavy, but healing. That night, I sat alone in the living room. The house was quiet, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator. I opened the small box of letters again and placed them neatly into a folder. For the first time, I didn't feel pain when I touched them, only understanding. But then, something fell out from the bottom of the box, a letter I'd never seen before. It wasn't mine. The handwriting was Thomas's. My hands shook as I unfolded it. Dear Mom, if you're reading this, it means I didn't have the courage to face you. I know you think I don't care, but I do. Every time I see your name, I feel like a failure. I couldn't give you the life you deserved, and every time you asked for help, I felt like a helpless boy again. Marilyn says I'm too proud, but it's not pride. It's shame. I don't know how to fix it. I just hope someday you'll forgive me. I pressed the letter to my chest. Oh, Thomas, I whispered. You never needed forgiveness. You just needed to come home. That evening, Marilyn called. Eleanor, she said quietly, I heard about Sophie. Is she safe? She's home, I replied. And so is Thomas. I'm glad, she said after a pause. Maybe now he can finally face himself. Her words lingered long after we hung up. For years, I'd seen Marilyn as the villain, cold, distant, complicit. But now I realized she too had carried her own pain. She'd held a broken man together with fragile love, and I had hated her for it. Later that week, Thomas asked to visit the old house I used to live in, the one he refused to help me keep. We drove there together. The building stood silent and crumbling, ivy climbing the brick walls. I used to think this place was a prison, he said quietly. But now I see it was a home. I nodded. We build prisons out of regret, Thomas. And we call them pride. He looked at me, eyes filled with tears. Can I fix this, Mom? I smiled faintly. Some things can't be fixed, but they can be forgiven. He helped me gather the few boxes I'd left behind, old photos, books, a faded quilt I'd made when he was born. When we stepped outside, I turned to him. You've done more today than I ever hoped for, I said softly. But one thing remains. What's that? Marilyn, I said. You need to tell her the truth. All of it. He nodded slowly. I will. That night, he and Marilyn sat across from each other in my living room. Sophie and I stayed in the kitchen listening from a distance. Marilyn, Thomas began, I need to thank you for protecting me, even when I didn't deserve it. She looked startled. Thomas, what are you? He interrupted gently. You kept my mother's letters. You paid her bills when I couldn't. You saved me from losing everything, even myself. Her eyes widened. How did you? Mom told me, he said. And I'm sorry I made you carry my guilt. For a long time, Marilyn didn't speak. Then she whispered, "I never wanted to replace her, Thomas. I just wanted peace." He reached for her hand. "Then maybe we can finally have it." The house was silent again after they left. Sophie sat beside me, resting her head on my shoulder. "Grandma," she said softly, "do you think things will ever really be okay?" I looked out the window, where the moonlight fell across the quiet street. "Not perfect, my dear," I said.
But honest.
"And that's better." As I closed my eyes that night, I thought of all the years lost to anger, all the words unsaid, all the love buried beneath pride. Tomorrow would bring change. I could feel it. The kind that comes after storms, when the air smells of earth and beginnings. But I also knew something deep in my bones. Peace always demands a price. And I feared we hadn't paid it in full yet. The next morning, the house felt different. Quieter, lighter. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, painting soft gold across the old wooden floor. For the first time in years, I didn't wake up with a heaviness in my chest. It was as if the air itself had forgiven us. Sophie was already awake, making breakfast in the kitchen. I watched her humming as she flipped pancakes, her long hair tied in a messy bun, her every move gentle but full of life. I thought about the scared little girl who once hid behind the couch when her father raised his voice. Now, she stood tall, a young woman who had the courage to face what 3 generations before her could not. Thomas came in quietly, carrying a basket of fresh flowers. "Morning, Mom," he said softly. Sophie wanted to brighten up the table. I smiled. "They're beautiful. Tulips, your father's favorite." He nodded, eyes lowering. "I remember. We sat together for breakfast. No arguments, no pretense, just quiet peace." Sophie talked about her plans for college, about how she wanted to study family psychology. "I want to help people heal before it's too late," she said, glancing at both of us. Thomas reached over and touched her hand. "You already have, sweetheart. You helped us." After breakfast, I asked Thomas to take me to the lake. The same lake where Sophie had once disappeared into the fog. He hesitated but agreed. We drove in silence, the car humming softly as the trees passed by like witnesses of all that had happened. When we arrived, I stepped out slowly, the air crisp and cool. "This place," I whispered, looking out over the still water, "used to hold all my fears. Now it just feels like truth." Thomas stood beside me. "Mom, I wanted to tell you something. Marilyn and we're seeing a counselor. I know it's late, but I want to change. For her."
For Sophie. For you.
I looked at him, truly looked at him. The wrinkles, the tired eyes, the boy who had once needed me and the man who had pushed me away. "Thomas," I said, voice trembling, "change isn't late when it saves what's left." He nodded, tears threatening. "I wish I could give you back all the years I stole." I placed a hand on his cheek. "You just did, by showing up." We stood there in silence. Birds skimmed the surface of the water, the world moving forward as if forgiving us. After a while, Thomas pulled a small object from his coat pocket. It was one of the old photographs I thought had been destroyed. "I found this," he said softly. "It was in the attic. The fire didn't get them all." I gasped, touching the faded image. It was me, holding baby Thomas in my arms, both of us laughing in the garden behind our first home. My eyes blurred with tears. "I used to think photos kept the past alive," I said. "But now I see. They just remind us what's worth saving." He smiled through tears. "Maybe we can start taking new ones." When we returned home, Marilyn was waiting by the door. Her face was pale, her hands trembling. "Thomas," she said, "we need to talk." He took her hands gently.
"I'm listening."
She hesitated, then looked at me. "Eleanor, I owe you the truth. Years ago, when you were struggling, I told Thomas you were fine, that you didn't want his help. I thought I was protecting him from guilt, but all I did was feed his distance. I felt the sting of betrayal, but also the ache of understanding. You thought you were doing what was best," I said quietly. Tears spilled down her face. "I was wrong. You didn't deserve that pain." I stepped forward and hugged her. It surprised both of us. Neither did you, Marilyn. None of us did. We just didn't know how to love each other right. Thomas joined us, his arms circling us both. And in that fragile, trembling embrace, the years of anger melted into something softer: acceptance. That evening, the three of us sat on the porch watching the sunset. Sophie joined us later, bringing out old photo albums she'd managed to save. She opened one to a blank page and placed a new picture in it, a recent one, taken that morning, of the four of us standing by the lake. "New beginnings," she said with a small smile. I laughed softly. "You're too young to sound so wise." "Guess I take after you," she replied, resting her head on my shoulder. The orange sky faded into purple. I thought about all the nights I had sat alone, wondering if my family would ever come back to me. Now they were here. Not perfect, but present. I turned to Sophie. "You know, when you're young, you think love means never getting hurt. But when you're old, you learn love means staying even after the hurt." She looked up at me, eyes glistening. "Did you ever stop loving Dad?" "Never," I said softly. "I just forgot how to show it." Marilyn looked over, her voice trembling. "Eleanor, thank you for not giving up on him." I smiled faintly. "A mother's love doesn't give up, Marilyn. It just waits for her children to find their way home." The porch light flickered on, casting a soft glow over us. Fireflies danced in the distance, the air filled with the smell of damp earth and blooming lilies. It felt like life itself had taken a deep breath. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat at my writing desk. I took out a blank piece of paper and began to write. "My dear Sophie, it began when you grow old and your hands shake like mine. Remember this. The greatest truth you'll ever learn is that forgiveness isn't weakness. It's the bridge that keeps love alive." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the same box where my old ones had once been hidden. Then I whispered a prayer for Thomas, for Marilyn, for all of us. As I turned off the lamp, I looked once more at the photo of my son as a baby. "You found your way back, my boy," I murmured. "That's all I ever wanted." The house was quiet again. Not the silence of loneliness, but of peace earned the hard way. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of time lift just a little. Somewhere deep inside, I could almost hear my late husband's voice, gentle and proud, saying, "You did good, Eleanor. You brought them home." And with a soft smile, I whispered into the stillness, "Yes, home at last." The story ended not with a tear, but with a breath of grace, the kind that heals everything time could not.